Connor and I met at an amazing social innovation event, 2 days, lots of speakers. And the minute Connor started speaking, I knew that I had to bring his viewpoints and his really fresh perspectives to the Conspiracy of Goodness podcast. You said in that talk, you can't raise buffalo. You can only restore the prairie. Now, this gets to the heart of both the macro and the micro level of what's going on in our world right now, both in climate change and so forth, and in society, how we get along. Give us your take on this. You can't raise buffalo, you can only restore the prairie.
Yeah, this kind of lesson for me, it started a couple years ago when I met some local folks at the farmers market who sell buffalo. And as a Lakota, that was our sacred animal, really central to our culture and everything that we did. And so to see some ranchers who probably have a little different outlook on life than I do doing this work, before I was going to buy anything from them, I came up and I asked them how they do what they do. And essentially, to me, their reply was that they don't. And for me, it was actually kind of the best answer they could have given, because everything that I've come to understand as a Lakota, but also as a bit of a citizen scientist and investigator and someone who really cares about climate, I've seen that there's no one solution that I felt like we could lean into all the way that was a cure for climate and food systems and all these things at the same time. But what I saw as I looked around the world was all these different places where every culture and every ecosystem and all these groups of people, but also, our relatives who have four legs or wings, or who slither or crawl on the ground, that they all really belong in a different series of connections and families and networks together. So when I would hear things, like, oh, if we could all just be vegan, or if we could all just do this or do that, it would solve all these crises. And I think the issue was that I saw with it is that it always still kind of put ourselves at the center of healing. And for me and my experiences on planet Earth, most of the things that I've seen heal, often a lot of the things that I've seen heal inside myself, didn't do that because of me. They did it because I gave room to the systems which naturally do that work. And I think sometimes we're so quick to put people at the center of the story of ecology that we forget that these systems function without us. And so in the case of the buffalo, the way that it works for them is that, buffalo need to have a diversity of prairie grasses to eat in order to be healthy. Unlike a cow, you can't just feed them whatever, right? And they'll grow and you can slaughter them and this and that. Buffalo are much more emotionally sensitive and ecologically sensitive. And so really what these ranchers told me was all that they could do to make their herd stronger was to make sure that all these different types of grasses are growing. And when we're out there in these places that are farmland and ranchland now, I think it's easy to forget that they were prairie before. And that in a prairie, you would have a root zone as deep and as biodiverse as those grasses were tall. And that not only was there this diverse ecology under the soil, but then that gave room for, the birds and the bugs and all these things making its progression all the way up to the buffalo. And so the buffalo can't really live without the birds and the bugs and all those things. And so for me, I think it became this quick demonstration of like the things that we want most, the world that we envision the most. And for me as a Lakota, that's buffalo roaming on the prairie again. That in order to get to those places, what we have to do is learn how to maybe take ourselves out of the role of protagonist in the healing of the planet and allow ourselves to sometimes play that role of witness and seeing what all of these other relatives, all of these other species in the space can do and have always done for us.
That is a beautiful way of thinking about the whole thing. And that brings up something that I was going to ask you quite a ways down in this interview. But there was a part when in the interview, we talked about the fact that people always say, can we save the earth? And that seems so misguided after what you just said, because the earth is sort of already saving itself. Talk to us about that since we're right there.
Yeah, I think we have that perspective a lot of times. Like I said, that just puts us as people right in the middle of it, right in the thick of things. And to me, I would say that that's a human centric view of the world. And the issue is that ecosystems are almost never human centric, and in most cases, it's the human interruption to an ecosystem that has disturbed it. Right. So if we stop looking at the planet, as just like a bunch of random things, hodgepodge, stuck on a sphere, and instead look at it as, one organism, right? Then we become just like a cell or an organ with a particular function on this planet. And just like any other being, there's cells, there's organs, there's things throughout the course of evolution that the organism decides, okay, this isn't beneficial to the whole anymore, right? And so I think sometimes we've got to let go of our attachment to this idea that people, we're the brains of the planet or we're the heart of the planet, when at the moment, like, we might just be more of a diseased gallbladder, and I think that's a really hard thing to do as the species that is meaning makers, is art makers, is music makers, right? And we want to value our uniqueness for that, but I think sometimes we forget our role, like I said before, as the observer. And so I think we're quickly on the verge of this point of figuring out, okay, like, what is it going to be like then to observe these changes that make human life impossible? And there's ways that we are perpetuating it, and in most cases there's ways that we're forced to participate in systems that perpetuate the downfall of our species, right? That make us more of a gallbladder than a liver or a stomach, because the work that we're doing collectively as a species, just making as much stuff as we can, making as much profit as we can, isn't actually a biological function that the rest of the organism, Earth, needs to see happening. And so I think, like, that's really the question that we've got to ask ourselves, is like, okay, as the meaning makers, the music makers, the ones who are witnessing all this, do we value our role in just being able to exist and appreciate where we are enough to put aside our desire to be so purposeful, our desire to have dominion over the rest of the species? Because if we don't do that, we'll find ourselves gone. We'll unfortunately take a lot of species with us, and the Earth will move on. Right? There are species that have, survived levels of climate change and evolved through levels of cataclysm that are far beyond what we, might be able to bring about in the near future, whether it's, through pollution or climate change or any of those things. And so I think that's really the question of our time, is like, human purpose. And can we be content with a purpose that is just appreciating these things? And then if we can agree that's a good enough of a purpose to just appreciate being on Earth, then we change our priorities in order to match that, so that we can, ensure the continuity of the value that our species can provide to the organism of our planet as a whole. Otherwise, evolutionarily, Earth's going to move on and evolve on without the organ that is the human species.